The return of the unyielding resolve was not met with cheers or triumphant fanfare. In the silent observation decks of the surviving assembly ships, beings watched with a kind of solemn, trembling awe. The human vessel drifted slowly into the designated safe zone, a scarred and blackened wedge against the stars. Its hull was pitted and scored, one of its stabilizers gone, its surface still radiating a faint, angry heat. It looked less like a conquering hero, and more like a tool that had been used hard and put away, just barely, in one piece. Inside, the crew was busy. Medic Ji was seeing to Engineer Jung, who had a gash on his forehead from a conduit that burst during the final turbulence. He waved her off, already running diagnostics on the primary engine. Tay was methodically shutting down non-critical systems, his hands moving with a tired certainty. Lee studied the long-range scans, ensuring no fragment of the tide had escaped. Commander Min stood quietly, looking at the image of the gas giant Helix Prime. Now just a peaceful orange marble on the screen. Not an invitation came from the eternal light. A formal reception, in gratitude. The humans cleaned up as best they could. They wore simple, dark uniforms, mended and clean, but showing signs of wear. There were no medals, no ceremonial armor. The shuttle bay of the assembly flagship was a vast, cathedral-like space filled with soft, ambient light and floating particles of light that danced like gentle snow. Thousands of the galactic assembly species were gathered, their forms delicate, their colors muted. They parted as the 5 humans walked in. The air was perfumed with a soft floral scent. It was utterly silent. Ambassador Kale moved forward to meet them. He saw them up close for the first time. He saw the density of them, the way they stood without floating, their feet planted firmly. He saw the calm in their eyes, a calm that had looked into a gas giant's fury and had not blinked. He saw the faded blood on Chun's temple, not wiped away. Kale bowed low, a gesture of deep respect among his people. The entire assembly mirrored him, a wave of bowed heads and lowered fronds. People of Earth. Kale's voice was amplified, soft but reaching every corner. You answered a cry from the dark. You faced the devourer, not with the light of superior energy, but with the strength of unbreakable will. You have saved our civilization. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid. Commander Min gave a short, respectful nod. We were in a position to help. It was the right thing to do. The simplicity of the statement seemed to confuse the crowd. No claims of destiny. No demands for reward. Just a job done, Kale continued, his voice gaining strength. We called for help, fearing monsters from the legends. We found Deathworlders. But we misunderstood. You are not masters of death. You are masters of survival. You treat forces that are endings for us as obstacles. You walk with gravity and pressure and fire as your companions. Lee stepped forward slightly. Ambassador, with respect, we do not master these things. We come from a world that does not forgive mistakes. We learn to listen to it, to respect it, to build knowing it will try to break what we build. Our companion is not death. It is life, life that is stubborn, life that fights for every breath, in every crack of every rock. That is what we brought here. A murmur went through the crowd. It was a new way of seeing. The humans were not a negation of life, but its most fierce affirmation. We would be honored, Kale said, and now his voice held a formal, weighty tone, if you would join the Galactic Assembly. Not as guests, not as saviors, but as members, as guardians. Your perspective, your doctrine of survival, is a truth we have forgotten in our peace. We need to remember that the universe is not always gentle. Min looked at his crew. Lee gave a small nod. Tay shrugged with a faint smile. Ji and Jun simply watched, waiting for his call. We accept, Min said. But on one condition, we are not a model for you to follow. You should not try to be like us. Your peace, your art, your gentle ways. They are your strength, as resilience is ours. We will stand guard so that you may continue to create beauty. That is a good trade. The ceremony that followed was brief. A data crystal, symbolizing membership, was exchanged. There were no grand speeches. The humans seemed more interested in the technical exchange that would follow, sharing basic medical knowledge to help the wounded, engineering data to help repair the damaged ship's dot as the event wound down. Kale found himself walking with Lee along a quiet viewing gallery, looking out at the stars. The unyielding resolve hung there, being scanned by curious, fluttering repair drones that looked like glass butterflies. What will you do now? Kale asked. Go home, Lee said simply. Report. There will be more ships. More crews. We will set up an outpost, as agreed. We will watch. And if another threat comes? One worse than the tide. Lee looked at him, and for the first time, Kale saw something like pity in her eyes, but not for him. For the thing that would be foolish enough to come. Then it will learn the same lesson, she said, her voice quiet. It is not the darkness that wins. It is the life that refuses to go quietly into the night. We are very, very good at refusing. Later, as the human shuttle departed back to their battered ship, the assembly watched. They watched the heavy, practical craft dock with a series of solid clangs. They watched the lights on the unyielding resolve blink in a pattern as systems were transferred. Then, with a flare of blue plasma, it seemed crude and violent amidst their own graceful energy trails. The human ship turned and began to move away. It did not glide into the shimmer of a faster-than-light corridor. It seemed to gather itself, like a muscle coiling. And then it punched its way into the void, accelerating with that same terrifying direct force until it vanished from their sensors. In the quiet that followed, the beings of the Galactic Assembly looked at their own slender hands. They looked at their beautiful, glowing ships. They felt the gentle, artificial gravity of their decks. They thought of storms that could shatter continents, of gravity that could crush bone, of an atmosphere that burned. And for the first time, they felt the true, staggering scale of the galaxy. It was not just a place of serene beauty. It was a place where worlds like Earth could exist. It was a place that had produced the devourer tide, and it was a place that had produced the quiet, firm people from that blue-green world who had broken the tide over their knee and called it a day's work. They were not afraid anymore. A deep, profound relief settled over them, warm and solid. The Deathworlders had arrived. They had not brought darkness. They had brought the deepest, most stubborn kind of light. The galaxy would never be gentle again. But for the first time in a long time, it felt safe. The shock of the kinetic impact rippled through the devourer tide, a silent concussion in the void. On the bridge of the eternal light, the assembly watched the sensor data with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The swarm did not simply absorb the hit. It recoiled, the biomass around the point of impact shattering into frozen, lifeless fragments. For a few precious moments, the hungry advance stopped. It does not understand, the chief scientist whispered. The attack provides no energy, only destruction. Ambassador Kale felt a fragile hope stir, but it was short-lived. On the tactical display, the tide began to change. The amorphous cloud contracted, pulling away from the human ship. It swirled and coalesced, drawing its scattered biomass into a new, denser form. It was no longer a spreading fog. It was shaping itself into a single, massive structure, a crude, organic imitation of a warship, with a thick, armored front and pulsing nodes that glowed with a sickly light. It's adapting, Kale said, his voice tight. It's creating a physical barrier, a shield against the projectiles. On the unyielding Resolve, the crew saw the same development. Tay watched the sensors, his usual easy smile gone. It's getting smart. It's making a wall of meat. Our railgun slugs will penetrate, but the kinetic energy will be dissipated across that mass. It'll take too many shots. Lee studied the new form. It's concentrating. That's a vulnerability. But its mass is still overwhelming. A direct fight is a numbers game we can't win. Min stood with his hands behind his back, his eyes fixed on the viewer, showing the gas giant Helix Prime that dominated the system. Its swirling bands of orange and gray were a constant, violent storm. An idea, born from a lifetime of training on a world of hurricanes and torrents, took shape. Ambassador Kale, Min's voice came through the calm as ever. The swarm is consolidating. It presents a single target. We are going to engage it, but not here. Where? Kale responded, fear creeping back. Your kinetic weapons are the only thing that has hurt it. Our most effective weapon isn't on our ship, Min said. He pointed a finger, though Kale couldn't see it, towards the viewer. It's there. Helix Prime. A ripple of confusion went through the assembly command pod. The gas giant? It was a backdrop, a celestial body, not a weapon. We will lure the swarm into the upper atmosphere, Min explained. The environment there is extreme. Turbulence, electrical storms, pressure variances, corrosive chemical soups. It is a chaotic, high-energy environment. It is also a gravity well from which you may not escape, Kale argued. Your engines would be fighting immense pressure and drag. The swarm will follow you into such a place? It follows energy and life, Lee cut in. We will appear as a retreating, wounded source of both. It will follow. And in that environment, our ship's design advantages will be maximized. The swarm's adaptability will be tested against pure, random violence. The plan was madness. It was a dive into a planetary maelstrom. But the humans presented it as a simple tactical maneuver. Jun was already at his station, rerouting power, reinforcing forward heat shielding, preparing for atmospheric compression. Electrostatic dispersion systems are active. Tay cracked his knuckles. Finally, a little weather. There was no time for a prolonged debate. The newly formed bioship of the Devourer Tide was beginning to move. A grotesque leviathan of pulsating flesh and chitin, turning towards the unyielding Resolve. Execute, Min said. The human ship didn't fire again. Instead, it turned and ran. But it was not a graceful fleeing glide. It was a violent, stumbling retreat. Tay fired the engines in uneven bursts, making the ship jerk and shudder. He vented a small amount of coolant, creating a glittering, energy-rich cloud. To the sensors of the Tide, it looked like a wounded animal, bleeding and fleeing for the only cover available, the turbulent giant planet. The ruse worked. The Tide bioship, driven by instinct to chase down weakened prey, altered its course. It began to accelerate, a monstrous hunter following a limping target towards the swirling orange clouds. The Eternal Light and the other surviving assembly vessels watched, helpless, from a safe distance. They saw the small gray human ship vanish into the top layers of the gas giant's atmosphere, a speck swallowed by orange and gray. A moment later, the massive, ugly form of the Tide followed it in, disappearing without a splash. A stone dropped into a toxic ocean dot inside Helix Prime. All hell was waiting. The unyielding Resolve shook violently. Alarms blared, not for damage, but for environmental overload. The external cameras showed a world of howling, chaotic fury. Lightning the size of continents flashed in the ammonia clouds. Winds screamed past at thousands of kilometers per hour. The pressure against the hull creaked and moaned, a constant, crushing song. Just like home, Tay muttered, his hands a blur on the controls. He wasn't fighting the storm. He was riding it, using the titanic wind shears to slingshot deeper, cutting the engines to appear dead. Behind them, the Tide bioship entered the atmosphere. It was built for space, for absorbing directed energy. It was not built for this. The chaotic turbulence ripped at its structure. Lightning arcs, drawn to its bioelectric field, lashed across its surface, scorching and fusing chunks of its biomass. It tried to adapt, to smooth its surface. But the environment was too random, too intense. "Now," Min said. His voice low. Tay fired the main engines at full power, a searing blue torch in the orange gloom. He pulled the ship into a near vertical climb, aiming for a vast, super-rotating jet stream. The Tide, damaged and confused, surged after the sudden energy signature. Jun watched the scanner. Its core neural cluster is centralizing, trying to protect itself from the lightning. It's forming a dense knot in its center mass. "That's our target," Lee said. "We need one shot. One perfect shot." Getting that shot meant getting closer. Tay dove again, threading the ship between two colliding storm fronts. The Tide, less maneuverable, was battered by the impact, its form distorting. For a second, its protective layers of biomass parted, revealing a throbbing, darkened core the size of a small moonlet. "Target visual. Railgun is loaded, but the atmospheric drag will destabilize the projectile over distance," Tay reported. "Then we don't fire from a distance," Min said. "We deliver it by hand. Tay, get us in close." Jun readied the primary lance. The lance was not a standard weapon. It was an emergency tool, a 10-meter long, solid carbon steel spear normally used for clearing space debris or as a last-ditch penetrator. Jun activated the magnetic rails in the forward cargo bay, normally used for launching probes. The unyielding resolve turned into the wind, fighting against the unbelievable pressure. The Tide bioship loomed ahead, filling the view, a wall of writhing flesh trying to close around the annoying metal insect. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark, terrifying relief. 500 meters. 300. "Hold her steady," Jun yelled. Tay's muscles strained as he fought the controls. The ship shuddered, a wing-like stabilizer tearing away in the wind. Alarm screamed. 100 meters. "Fire!" Jun hit the launch command. With a deep, resonant thum that vibrated through the entire ship, the lance shot forward. It wasn't fired into space. It was fired into a hurricane. It wobbled, then stabilized. A dark streak in the chaotic atmosphere. It struck the exposed core of the Devourer Tide. There was no explosion of light. There was a physical rupture. The lance punched deep into the neural cluster, and the horrific pressures of the gas giant's atmosphere did the rest. The wound was ripped open, tore wider by the screaming winds. The corrosive atmospheric chemicals flooded in. The Tide bioship did not die with a scream, but with a convulsion. Its cohesive structure unraveled, the biomass coming apart like wet paper in a gale, scattering into a billion inert fragments that were instantly swept away and dissolved in the violent atmosphere of Helix Prime. The unyielding resolve. Battered and scarred, its hull glowing a dull red from friction heat. Powered out of the upper atmosphere and back into the clean, silent black of space. It trailed smoke and frozen gases. A wounded warrior returning from a battle fought, not in the void, but in the heart of a storm. On the bridge of the eternal light, the silence was profound. They had watched the final act on scanners, interpreting the chaotic data. They saw the human ship emerge, broken but alive. They saw no sign of the Devourer Tide. The swarm was gone, eradicated not by a glorious fleet, but by a single ship, a steel spear, and the unforgiving fury of a planet. The humans had used the galaxy itself as a weapon. Ambassador Kale looked at his own thin hands, then at the scarred, steady shape of the human vessel on his screen. He finally understood the true meaning of the word Deathworlder. They were not just survivors of a harsh world. They were its ambassadors. And they had just introduced the Devourer Tide to their home philosophy, total environmental war. The air inside the command pod of the Eternal Light tasted of sterile fear and ozone. Ambassador Kale watched the main viewer, which was split between the feed from the luminous beacon and a tactical overlay of the system. The small gray human ship sat tethered to the wounded cruiser, a strange, static tumor against the graceful, dying arcs of other assembly vessels trying to flee the tide. On the feed, the two humans worked with a speed that felt violent. The medic, G, had finished stabilizing the injured. She now moved to a cluster of crew who were shivering, their skin a pale, sickly color. She scanned them with a handheld device, her face behind the clear faceplate unreadable. "The atmospheric mix has dropped," she said, her voice translated but flat through the coms. "Nitrogen levels are too high. You are hypoxic. You need more oxygen." She pulled a compact canister from her pack and began adjusting a wall vent. To the aliens, adding more of the volatile, reactive gas seemed like adding fuel to a fire. Engineer John had moved from the sparking wall panel to a main power conduit. The assembly technology was beautiful, a bundle of glowing fibers that pulsed with soft light. It was dead now. John didn't try to understand its elegance. He opened a heavy case and pulled out two thick cables capped with brutal-looking clamps. He asked the luminous beacon's engineer, a trembling being named Fen, where the main energy buffer was. Fen pointed a delicate finger. John nodded, clamped one cable to the buffer terminal and the other to a secondary port. He then flipped a switch on a box attached to the cables. There was no gentle hum. A raw, buzzing growl filled the corridor, and the lights on the luminous beacon flickered once, then blazed to a harsh, white intensity. Several aliens flinched, covering their sensitive eyes. The humans didn't seem to notice. The power was on. It was not the soft, ambient glow they were used to. It was stark, functional light. "It will hold for 12 hours, John said, disconnecting the cables. "Your life support is back online. Atmospheric controls are reset to Earth normal as a baseline. You may adjust for comfort." Commander Min's voice came from the unyielding resolve. "We have restored minimal function to the luminous beacon. We are detaching and moving to a defensive position. The swarm is shifting its focus." As the blunt boarding tube retracted and the human ship floated free, Kale finally found his voice. He opened a direct channel. "Human vessel, this is Ambassador Kale of the Galactic Assembly. We thank you for your aid. Your actions are unprecedented. May we inquire, what is your origin? Your technology confuses our sensors." On the bridge of the unyielding resolve, Min and Lee exchanged a look. They had expected questions, but so soon. Lee nodded. It was time for basic disclosure. "Ambassador Kale," Lee began, her tone still that of a professional briefing. "We originate from a planetary system we call Sol. Our world is designated Earth. We are a species that evolved in a highly competitive biosphere. We are what you would classify as a carbon-based, oxygen-breathing species. On the Eternal Light, scientists scrambled. Sol. It matches one of the Deathworld coordinates," one whispered. Kale pressed, his curiosity overcoming his terror. "Your ship. It withstood a direct energy strike. It maneuvers under accelerations that are impossible for any living being to endure." "How is this possible?" Min answered this time. "Our ship is designed for resilience. Its hull is a composite of layered alloys, each with a different purpose. Ablation, thermal dispersion, kinetic absorption. As for the acceleration, he paused, as if choosing simple words. Our bodies are adapted to higher gravitational forces. Our world has a gravitational pull of approximately 1.1 of your standard units. Our training involves enduring much higher forces for short periods. Our ship's structure is built to do the same. We do not cancel inertia. We withstand it. A stunned silence hung on the channel. They withstand it. The phrase was so simple, so final. It wasn't technology that defied physics. It was a brutal acceptance of it. Your world, Cale ventured, almost afraid to ask. You said competitive. Can you describe it? Lee took over, her voice calm, listing facts. Earth's atmosphere is approximately 21% oxygen, which is highly reactive and supports combustion. The weather systems are volatile, with storms that generate winds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour and temperature swings of 60 degrees in a single day. The planetary crust is divided into tectonic plates that shift, causing groundquakes and volcanic eruptions. The biosphere contains millions of microbial pathogens, as well as larger predators and plants that developed chemical and physical defenses. Survival for our ancestors was a continuous process of adaptation in response to acute threats. Each statement was a hammer blow to the assembly listeners. Oxygen that supported combustion, storms that could shred their strongest structures, a ground that moved, and the pathogens, they lived in a soup of invisible death. You evolved in this? Cale's voice was a whisper. It is the only environment we know, Lee said, a slight hint of something not pride, but perhaps identity in her tone. It has shaped our doctrine. We call it the doctrine of survival. It has 3 principles: adaptability, redundancy, and resilience. We do not have one solution to a problem. We have several. If one system fails, another takes over. We are built, both as organisms and as a society, to endure shock and continue functioning. Chun's voice cut in from the engineering station on the human ship. Swarm is probing our position. They're emitting new energy patterns, trying to scan us. Our non-standard signatures are confusing them. Min looked at the tactical screen. The Devourer tide had finished consuming the other crippled ships and was now turning its attention. It flowed like a slow, intelligent river towards the unyielding resolve and the luminous beacon. Ambassador Cale, Min said, your weapons are energy-based. The swarm consumes energy. It is a predator perfectly evolved to hunt you. Our primary ship-to-ship weapons are kinetic projectiles made of solid material accelerated to high velocities. They create concussive force and physical damage. They do not give the swarm energy to absorb. On the viewer, they saw the human ship rotate. A bay door slid open on its underside. A long gray rail, unadorned and mechanical, extended. There was no glowing charge-up, no hum of power. Just a deep, resonant thump that vibrated through space, transmitted as a sonic pulse through the hulls of the nearby ships. A small, dense tungsten rod, no larger than a man's arm, shot out at a fraction of the speed of light. It was invisible to the eye until it struck. It hit the leading edge of the Devourer tide. There was no brilliant explosion. Instead, a hole was punched clean through the cohesive biomass. The material around the hole didn't melt or burn. It shattered, frozen and fragmented by the sudden, catastrophic transfer of kinetic energy. A shock wave rippled through the tide, causing it to recoil and churn in confusion. It was an attack with no heat, no light, only pure, blunt force. The assembly watched, bewildered. They had never considered such a crude, physical solution. To them, space was a place for energy and light. To the humans, space was a place where a heavy object, once moving, kept moving until it hit something. The tide hesitated, its adaptive processes struggling with this new input. It was like a stomach trying to digest a stone. Kale stared at the human ship, this vessel of blunt angles and hard answers. He thought of their calm description of a world of fire, quakes, and poison. He thought of them simply withstanding forces that meant instant death. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his core, but it was now mixed with a desperate, dawning hope. They had not called forth mindless devils. They had called forth engineers, survivors. And for the first time since the Devourer tide had appeared, the swarm had flinched. The bridge of the Galactic Assembly flagship, the Eternal Light, was a scene of silent despair. The main viewer showed the destruction of the outpost in the Helix system. The Devourer tide moved like a slow, sick fog, enveloping the small, glowing station. Gentle beams of defensive energy shot out from the station, causing the tide to ripple and contract momentarily before it simply absorbed the light and continued, relentless and hungry. There was a final, bright flash, and then the station was gone. The only sound was the soft, mournful chime of a lost signal. Ambassador Kale stood with his delicate four-fingered hands clasped. He felt the weight of his suggestion like a stone in his gut. The Deathworld signal had been sent. There had been no answer. Perhaps the old archives were myths. Perhaps those terrible worlds were barren. Or perhaps the beings there had heard the scream of a dying galaxy and chosen to turn away. His people were not built for this kind of violence. Their ships were designed for beauty and efficient travel. Their weapons and afterthought meant to deter, not to destroy. They were being systematically erased by a thing that had no mind, only appetite. Ambassador, a sensor officer chimed, her voice tinged with confusion. Anomalous contact. At the edge of the Helix system debris field. It is. Very small. On the viewer, a new icon appeared. It was not the pulsing yellow of the tide, nor the soft blue of an assembly vessel. It was a dull, gray square. No energy signature bloomed around it. No graceful light emanated from its hull. It seemed to drink the starlight around it, a quiet, angular shadow. Identify it, the ship's captain ordered. Scanning. Composition is a layered metallic alloy. Density is extreme. Thermal signature is minimal. Propulsion traces. Commander, it appears to be using a continuous high-yield plasma reaction, but the radiation is contained behind what seems to be pure physical shielding. There are no gravitic field emissions. None. The bridge crew stirred. No gravity drive? That was impossible for interstellar travel. The G-forces would be astronomical. The thing had to be a derelict, a piece of weird debris. Then it moved out. It didn't glide. It turned with a short, sharp burst from maneuvering thrusters. A puff of superheated gas, visible for a second, before it was gone. Its path was direct, efficient, with no wasted motion. It was heading toward the luminous beacon, a cruiser that had been caught in the tide's outer tendrils and was now drifting, its engines dark, its hull scarred by corrosive patches. Is it one of theirs? A new devourer form? The captain whispered. No, Kale said, a cold certainty settling in his veins. He looked at the data, the sheer mass of the object, the brutal simplicity of its propulsion, the absolute lack of any cushioning gravity field. It's an answer. It's from there. On the bridge of the unyielding resolve, the mood was focused, calm. The crew saw the devastation with analytical eyes, confirmed the hostile entity is a cohesive biological swarm. Lee said, her eyes on the sensor readout. Pattern suggests a central neural cluster, but it's decentralized. It learns fast. The assembly ships, Min said, pointing to the graceful, butterfly-like vessels. Their weapons are energy-based, ineffective. The swarm eats energy. Tay's hands were steady on the controls. The luminous beacon is still showing minor life signs. The swarm is concentrating on the larger vessels first. It's ignoring us. It might read us as inorganic, G suggested from her med station. Our power signatures are buried deep. Our hull doesn't glow. The distress call from the luminous beacon came through then, not as words, but as a universal digital scream of systems failure and life support decay. Min made a decision. We moved to intercept. Tay, get us between the swarm and that cruiser. Do not fire unless fired upon. Lee, open a channel on the frequency of their original distress signal. Simple, clear words. The unyielding Resolve's main engines fired. To the assembly sensors, it was a shocking act. A sun-bright plume of raw plasma erupted from its stern, and the ship accelerated at a rate that made the assembly crew gasp. It should have torn itself apart. It should have crushed anything inside it into paste. It simply shot forward. A gray bullet dot, it slid to a relative stop beside the stricken luminous beacon, its thrusters firing in rapid, precise bursts. A tendril of the Devourer tide, sensing the movement, lashed out. A beam of corrosive yellow energy struck the human ship's port side. On the eternal light, they watched, expecting the small gray vessel to vaporize or melt. The beam hit. There was a flash of light as the outer layer of the hull superheated. Molten metal sprayed into the vacuum and instantly solidified into glittering dust. Sensors showed a hull breach, but only in the first layer. The energy dissipated, unable to penetrate the second, denser armor beneath. The human ship shuddered slightly, like a large animal shrugging off a blow. Then a voice came through the comms. It was flat, clean, devoid of the musical harmonics of assembly speech. It was a voice used to giving and receiving facts. Unidentified affected vessel, this is human starship Unyielding Resolve. We are positioned to render assistance. Do you require medical or engineering support? Please respond. The silence on the assembly flagship was absolute. They had expected roars, screeches, the clicks of mandibles. They had received the tone of a professional first responder. Captain Tay, under the gaze of Commander Min, kept the ship steady as another tendril swept past. They're starting to notice us, he said, not with fear, but with observation. Hold position, Min ordered. On the luminous beacon, the crew were in a panic. Their world was dark, their systems dead. Then this thing had appeared, taken a hit that would have cut their own ship in half, and was asking if they needed help. The ship's commander, a frail being named Relaine, activated a failing emergency transmitter. We are failing. Life support at 12%. Hull integrity compromised. We cannot stop the corrosion. Lee's voice came back, calm. Understood. We are sending a boarding team. We will secure an airlock. Prepare for physical connection and possible contamination protocols. A few minutes later, a section of the human ship's hull extended a blunt mechanical tube. It sealed against the luminous beacon's elegant, ornate airlock door with a series of heavy clangs that reverberated through the silent cruiser. The humans did not request permission to open the door. They bypassed the electronic locks with a manual override tool and forced it open. The first being to step through was Medic G, followed by Engineer June. They wore sealed environment suits, but their faceplates were clear. Their movements were not slow or cautious, but brisk and efficient. They carried heavy cases. The air in the luminous beacon was thin and cold. The alien crew huddled together, their large eyes wide with terror and confusion. G went straight to the nearest injured alien, whose limb was bent at a wrong angle. She didn't coo or whisper assurances. She scanned it with a device, nodded, and from her case withdrew a rigid splint and a thick bandage. Her motions were firm, fast, and certain. The alien flinched at her touch, but the bone was set in seconds. Jun was already at a wall panel, ripping off the burnt covering with gloved hands, exposing sparking wires. He didn't use a delicate energy welder. He used a handheld device that shot a blinding arc of light, fusing the conduits back together in a messy, strong weld. On the eternal light, Ambassador Kale watched the live feed from the luminous beacon. He saw the humans work. He saw their strength, their speed, their utter lack of ceremony. He listened to the data his science team was frantically compiling from the scans of the human ship. "Ambassador," the lead scientist said, his voice trembling. "The gravitational force inside that vessel during its maneuver. Our models show it would have been at least 15 standard Gs for a sustained period." Kale felt faint. "Their inertial dampeners must be beyond our understanding." "That's just it, sir," the scientist whispered. "We detect no inertial dampening field. None at all. The only gravity on that ship is a faint, artificial one-directional pull, likely just for comfort. They withstood that acceleration. Their bodies, their ship's structure. They just took it." Kale looked back at the feed. He saw Medic G administering a hypospray to a shocked alien. He saw Engineer June hammering a metal plate back into place. These were not monsters of mindless rage. They were something else. They were beings who treated a force that would instantly kill any assembly citizen as a minor inconvenience. They treated a hull breach as a repair job. They treated a galactic horror as a problem to be solved. The fear in his heart did not lessen. But it changed shape. He was not afraid they would eat his people. He was afraid, in a deep, profound way, of the universe that had created them. A universe where survival was not a gentle dance, but a brutal, unending fight. And these creatures had won that fight on a scale he could barely imagine. The Deathworlders had arrived, and their first act was not conquest. It was a brisk, efficient offer of help, delivered in a steel box that ignored the laws of physics as the assembly knew them. The great chamber of the Galactic Assembly was a place of quiet harmony. Light drifted softly from the floating orbs that lined the curved walls, casting gentle glows on the delegates. There were no sharp sounds, only the soft hum of translation devices and the whisper of air through delicate vents. Most of the species here were slender, with large, thoughtful eyes and skin in shades of soft blue or pale green. They were people of calm seas and mild skies, of worlds where the weather was a gentle friend. Today, however, a cold fear hung in the air. On the central viewer, a map of the galaxy's fringe glowed. A blot of sickly, pulsing yellow was spreading, system by system. They called it the Devourer Tide. It was not a fleet, but a swarm, a single, hungry organism that consumed all energy and organic matter in its path. It ate worlds. Their own beautiful, glowing ships, armed with beams of precise light, were useless. The tide absorbed their energy, grew stronger, and moved on. "The systems of Lyra and Cygnus are silent," said the head delegate, a being named Elia, whose fronds trembled slightly. "Our most powerful particle dispersers only slow it for a moment. It learns, it adapts." A murmur of despair flowed through the room. They were builders, thinkers, artists. War was a forgotten, ugly concept from a distant past. They had no answer to this mindless hunger got then. From a quieter section, Ambassador Kale rose. He was older, his carapace a faded gray instead of the vibrant blues of the others. He was a historian. "There is one protocol," Kale said, his voice a soft rasp. "A failsafe. It is listed in the oldest archives from the time of the first founding. It has never been used. It was meant only for an extinction-level threat." All eyes turned to him. "What is it?" Ilya asked. Kale seemed to shrink. "The Deathworld Contingency." The term meant nothing to most. A few elders shifted uneasily. Kale explained. When the first galactic map was made, long before this assembly, probes were sent out. They scanned millions of worlds. Most were like ours, calm, stable, life-friendly. But a tiny, terrifying fraction were classified as Deathworlds. These were planets of such extreme violence and competition that they were deemed unreachable. Their gravity was crushing. Their atmospheres were poison. Their tectonic plates screamed. Their very life forms were engaged in a perpetual, savage war for survival. The protocol states that if all hope is lost, a blind distress beacon can be sent to the coordinates of these worlds. Silence. Then, a wave of disbelief. You propose we invite monsters? Another delegate cried out. We are being eaten by one horror, and you would call another? Kale held up a thin hand. The archives are clear. Life from a death world would be unimaginably resilient. They would be survivors in a way we cannot comprehend. They might have solutions born not of peace, but of relentless struggle. It is a terrible risk. But what alternative do we have? To be polished bones in a silent galaxy? The debate was long and fearful. Images of imagined monsters, giant claws, ravenous maws, planet-killing rage flashed in their minds. But the map continued to glow with that spreading yellow stain. Finally, with heavy hearts, they voted. The Deathworld contingency was activated. A single ancient machine was awakened. It did not contain a message of diplomacy or a call for gentle aid. It was a raw scream into the dark, a burst of data showing the Devourer Tide's consumption and the coordinates of the Assembly's core worlds. It was a beacon of pure desperation. The signal shot into the void, aimed at 3 specific, dreaded stars. On one of those targeted worlds, a planet of raging blue oceans and fierce green landmasses. The signal was heard dot in a facility built into a cold mountain. A young officer named Lee watched her screen. She had sharp eyes and dark hair tied back simply. The room was quiet, lit by the glow of a dozen monitors tracking the cosmos. A soft chime sounded, different from the thousands of other cosmic noises they filtered daily. Commander Min, Lee said, her voice calm. We have an anomaly. Signal origin is not local. It's structured, but it's not any human or known probe signature. It's a burst, repeating, heavy on visual data. A man in his 40s, with a serious face and the steady posture of a career soldier, walked over. Commander Min looked at the decoded data unfolding on Lee's screen. He saw the graceful, doomed ships. He saw the consuming yellow swarm. He saw the map, the plea implicit in the repeating cycle. First contact, Min said, his voice low. And it's a distress call. Protocols were activated. The Watchman Division's purpose was observation and defense, but its mandate included extraterrestrial contact. This was not a greeting. It was a cry for help from an unknown advanced civilization. The data was rushed up the chain. The decision came back faster than Lee expected. We are to answer, Min told his small team. Pilot Tay, with his quick smile and quicker reflexes, and Medical Officer G, who was as precise with her words as she was with her instruments, gathered. Not with a fleet, with one ship, a silent observer. The unyielding resolve. The unyielding resolve did not look like the glowing ships of the Assembly. It was angular, forged of layered alloys designed to withstand immense pressure and heat. Its weapons were not elegant beams, but magnetic rails for firing solid projectiles and close defense laser clusters. Its engines were built for brutal thrust, not smooth, silent travel. It was a submarine meant for the ocean of space. Our orders are to assess, Min said as they prepped for departure. Determine the threat. Determine the nature of the civilization calling. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. We are going into the unknown. Lee looked once more at the data, at the beautiful, fragile ships breaking apart. "They don't seem like fighters," she noted. "No," Min agreed. "They look like victims. But we don't know what they're facing, or what they haven't shown us. Caution is our first tool." As the unyielding Resolve lifted from its hidden bay, not with a shimmer, but with a deep, thunderous roar that shook the mountain, the crew felt the familiar, crushing hand of gravity press them into their seats. Tay grinned, his hands dancing over the controls, balancing the tremendous force. To them, this was normal. It was the feeling of going to work. The ship tore through the atmosphere, leaving a fiery trail, and punched into the silent black. It engaged its main drive, a sustained explosion that pushed them forward at a rate that would have turned the bones of any assembly species to dust. They endured it with measured breaths and focused minds. Weeks passed in the strange twilight of faster-than-light travel. They studied the signal, the enemy, the possible strategies. She prepared her medbay for alien biology, her cabinets filled with broad-spectrum antibiotics, trauma kits, and surgical tools that would seem barbarically sharp to a gentle species. John, the chief engineer, constantly checked the ship's robust, redundant systems, the triple-layered hull, the auxiliary power cells, the raw material fabricators. Back in the galactic assembly, fear had turned to a numb dread. The signal had been sent. There was no response. The devourer tide advanced. Many believed the Deathworlds were either empty or inhabited by mindless beasts who ignored the call. Ambassador Kale stared at the stars, wondering if he had doomed them all by suggesting the unthinkable. The assembly prepared its final, beautiful, doomed defenses. Neither side knew what was coming. The assembly waited for a monster, a mythical beast of claw and fury. They expected a roaring entrance, a display of terrifying power. They did not expect the quiet, steel-gray wedge of the unyielding Resolve to slip into the edge of the besieged system like a shadow, its sensors active and watching, its crew speaking in calm, simple tones as they observed the apocalyptic battle already underway. They did not expect the first human words, broadcast into the galactic assembly, to be a clear, composed statement from Commander Lee. "Unknown fleet, this is human vessel Unyielding Resolve. We have received your signal. We are here to observe and assist if possible. Please identify your commanding authority." The message was not a roar. It was a knock on the door. But the door led out of a world of gentle light and into a universe of hardened steel and unbreakable will.